Okay, hello and welcome to our end of the month Thursday night book club. I am your host, Dana Morningstar, and today, well, I should say right now, I have with me Shay and Agatha, and James will be joining us here in about 10 or 15 minutes. So, welcome. If you are new here, welcome, and if you are returning here, welcome. The book that we're going to be discussing today is called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. This is an older version of the book, but it's a classic. It's been around for quite a while, and it's kind of if there was a Bible for trauma, this would be it. So, really fantastic book. Before we get going, I just wanted to mention a few things real quick. This book club is being sponsored by audible.com. So if you are interested in getting an audiobook, that's a good place to go. They have over 100,000 audiobooks to choose from. And if you go to the link audibletrial.com/thrive after abuse, you get a free ebook if you sign up. And let's see, next month, the book that we're going to be reading is called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. And you can see all of these books as well as what we're reading for 2019 if you go over to my website, thriveafterabuse.com/book club. So with that said, welcome Agatha and Shay.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
You get terrified next month book club. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah. Probably going to trigger me.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. So often, I think a lot of these books are really geared more towards extreme personality disordered parents, narcissists or borderline personality disorder. And I have not read next month's book yet, so I'll be curious to see how she goes about approaching this information and just discussing more like emotionally immature parents.
I will be dealing with about 10 years of parenting as an emotionally mature person.
I did some of that too. Don't feel bad.
Help
Yeah.
me. Can we do different book?
So let's just hop into it. So what did you guys think? The Body Keeps the Score.
It sure does.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shay.
I think one of the things that I originally read this a couple of years ago and kind of went back through it for this, just to refresh my memory on it. The thing that originally hit me the hardest when I was reading it was it really made me realize just how disconnected from my bodily sensations that are attached to emotions. Really, I mean, it just floored me when I first started going down that path to realize just how little I understood my own body's sensations and what they actually signified. That was a deep rabbit hole when I first went down.
Did you have certain emotions that you were more out of tune with than others?
Anger was a big one. I would do a lot of that, tension armoring stuff. So it was there in my body. My body was expressing it, but I didn't relate to it. It was just like this thing that was happening that I had no basis for understanding what it was really about or why it was there. And that was pretty mind-boggling when I finally understood all of this actually is telling you something and you're supposed to notice it and understand it and listen to it and communicate with it and do something about it. So yeah.
Right. What was your experience like, Agatha?
Well, I got mad. I usually get mad when I read books that explain, in details how to help.
I can barely hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me? I put paper over my computer. Did I cover my mic?
I still can't. I can hardly hear you.
Why? Can you hear me now?
It's still really low. It's so strange because before we went live, you were loud and fine.
I know.
Well, that's much better. Whatever you just did.
I did nothing. I just start talking louder.
Oh. Well, that'll
That
do
works
it too.
Okay, I'll be talking loud. Awesome. Just tell me when I go too loud again.
Okay.
So gosh, so I kind of lived in this reality that they don't know what to do yet, how to help victims of childhood trauma and, you know, all those different experiences. And I'm reading this book and it's filled with scientific proof that they know what to do. They just don't do it. And I'm like,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
that was my main emotion. So I kind of went very political about this book. Like the politics shown in this book, it's just, I think that was the most triggering thing for me about this book.
I got triggered by that too. Even rereading it now, I had a similar reaction. I understand what you mean.
Well, I'm sorry, Dana. I read it first time this year, so I had no idea that they already knew it for years. And I called Dana. I'm like, when did they write this book first?
So was the frustration and the anger that there's so much information that's out there about trauma and it's not being utilized?
Yep. I actually sent it to my therapist. I'm like, you have to read this book and you have to have people read this book.
Mm-hmm. Like,
seriously, because it shows what works. It shows, like, freaking yoga, right? We're gonna talk about it later, but like, I know yoga works because it worked for me. Mm-hmm. It worked to release some sort of emotion trapped in my shoulders, in my back, you know, in all the different places of my body, and it helped me with pain. I know it works, but I didn't know there is a research that says it helps people who have, you know, severe PTSD from the war or from other trauma, like sexual trauma. By the way, this book is pretty triggering, so we may trigger you guys a little bit today. So let us know if something is too triggering, I guess, so we can just stop talking about it. Like, I guess we try to be really, have discernment about it. But yeah, so there's research that works, and I was really shocked because it's like no one knows what to do.
Yeah,
it kind of feels like abandonment all over again, that it's just being ignored and it shouldn't be ignored. And yeah, I can understand what you mean.
Yeah, he mentions in the book, let me see if I can find it in my notes. It was so right on about, see, I'll just read it from my memory because my notes are super long. Basically about how psychiatry is, you know, it's a fairly new field, and currently it's, well, at the time of the writing of the book, he was saying, you know, it's basically, it addresses symptoms and not causes. So, and he was using the equivalent of, it's like seeing a person with blisters and you're just treating the blisters, you're not going deeper and, you know, addressing like, oh, there's, or like they've got some sort of open wound. Oh, it's not just the wound we have to worry about, it's the bacteria and what's going on in the body system to cause this sore or whatever it is.
Or not checking the shoe size to see if maybe that's the problem. Put the Band-Aid on and stick the foot right back in that small shoe.
Exactly. And I think that takes it to an extra level, right? So he was just talking about, so like if people are presenting to a doctor's office and they're like, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. And he's like, you know, most psychiatrists are going to treat the depression and anxiety, and they're not going to dig a lot deeper to figure out, okay, well, what's going on? Why is this person depressed? Why? This is a symptom, but what's causing this? And what you were just saying, Shay, I think takes it even deeper, because some people are like, oh, it's my relationship, right? Or it's my job. And then going a step further and like, okay, well, let's examine why you're walking around in this situation that's really toxic for you or that's causing you pain. I think that the combination of therapy and kind of more of a holistic approach to understanding trauma has become more mainstream. Mm-hmm. But the specifics that he gives in the book about there needs to be this body-based trauma and the trauma response that we all have. Whenever we experience trauma, we have a trauma response. And that's normally, you know, fight, flight, freeze, or friend. And when we go into these responses, it's a default. It's not something that is, and an intentional logical action, that part of our brain, that logic and critical thinking part of our brain is offline. So it's the baser parts of our brain that have taken over and are driving our behavior. And so he talks about we have, in order for any healing to happen, especially at the clinical level, there needs to be this understanding of the kind of neurochemistry behind it all and what's really going on with the person's brain.
And just understanding the fact that there is a biology to this. It's you can't shame yourself for something that your body does naturally because it's supposed to. I mean, it's not that we're defective. And I think I know for a lot of my life, I felt like there was something wrong with me. And because I didn't understand all of that. And it's a lot worse if you're dealing with whatever the problem is, plus you're feeling like something's wrong with you for a reaction that's absolutely normal. And just understanding that piece of it can make a big difference, I think.
Oh, it's huge. And he mentioned something that was interesting in the book about survivors, that there were, I forget, quite a few survivors from 9/11, and they were kind of doing these studies about what was most helpful for them with healing.
Oh, God.
And they had found that it was acupuncture, yoga, I think meditation, and EMDR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was not talk therapy. It was not.
And they gave them the psychotherapy, regular psychotherapy. Why? Because it's New York, and that's like the most famous, psychotherapy place in America. And then they also gave them the CBT, knowing that also doesn't work, which is kind of crazy, because CBT does not work for all the trauma, for all the, healing that must happen. Doesn't provide everything.
Well, I think that's better geared for when you're trying to change habits or thought patterns. And if that's all your focus is, I think it's very effective for that kind of thing. But trauma is way bigger than that.
Yeah, I use CBT. I'm in a cognitive behavioral therapy, but I'm using it to break the patterns of my behavior that can repeat abuse in my, my future and my daughter's future. So I'm literally just working on the different patterns. But I'm healed from trauma already, and that did not happen in CBT. It actually happened in yoga, meditation, mindfulness, community of survivors, and a bunch of the things that are described in this book.
Yes. Well, I think that one of the things to know about what's so frustrating about medicine, and especially about psychiatry, is because C-Fin mentioned this, that says, well, isn't that something? Got to follow the evidence, right? And that's the whole premise of medical science, is it has to be evidence-based, because people get hurt when we do things that we just think this will work. And what's so frustrating is you can have the evidence, but it takes decades to make it into the mainstream where it becomes then common knowledge. For example, there was I believe it was either OBGYN or a pediatrician who began seeing the correlation in her practice between children with severe birth defects and women that had undergone x-rays during pregnancy, because back then that was very common. And so then she was like, you know what, this is a thing. Like these two have got to be related. She was basically laughed out of her profession. She was not taken seriously. She basically ruined her reputation, and she fought tooth and nail to get this evidence out there so it would be more studied, to stop giving women unnecessary x-rays while they were pregnant. And so you think, okay, here was this medical doctor who was an expert in her field and who was still being silenced. And it still took several decades after she championed this fight in order for that to become mainstream. And it's the same thing with psychiatry. And he also mentions in here too, that the beginning of the DSM, or the DSM-3, at the beginning of it, it had said, like, this is just kind of an overview of different mental disorders. This by no means is an exact science, and it for sure should not be used to categorize people or to be used for like insurance purposes. And now where are we today? It's used for insurance purposes, and it's used for classifying people.
And this is
So
not accurate.
yeah, it's not. I mean, it's not an exact science by any stretch. Um, and it's interesting too with psychiatry is it's the only real branch of medicine where the doctor never sees the organ that they're working on. And if you think about it, because if you have a GI doctor, or if you have a doctor who specializes in respiratory issues, they're going to take x-rays, they're going to do tests, they can see into the body and see what's going on. Psychiatrists very, very rarely are ever going to order an MRI or any type of brain scanning, anything.
So. There are actually physical changes in brain, in wavelength, in frequencies, in so many ways, because trauma actually impacts how our brain is working, like how our cognitive functions, memory, basically everything is impacted by trauma. Our muscles, we can develop autoimmune disease because of the trauma. We can.
I think one of the most significant things that he mentions about trauma is he refers to it as our inner map. And so early in the book, he talks about with these children, how they had done different brain imaging of children that had undergone horrific abuse and those that were quote unquote normal children, and the differences in their brain and the differences in the way that they would see the world. And one of the studies that they did is they had different, kind of like the Rorschach ink blot test, but they had different pictures, and they would have the children explain, tell us what happened. What does this show you? What does this image look like to you? Now, what do you think happened before this image, and what do you think happened afterwards? Like basically creating a story around it. The children that had been traumatized, it was generally a lot of a violent narrative. It was an abusive narrative. It was a very tragic narrative, whereas children who hadn't undergone that had a fairly optimistic, positive outlook on things. And so Dr. van der Kolk was saying, and it makes sense, right? Like if this is your experience in life, then your worldview is going to mold around that. And that this inner mapping that occurs early in life, and it sets the stage for adulthood for how we perceive different things. But I think it's important to add too, that this inner mapping can be rewritten for positive or negative throughout our life. So if something tragic, if somebody breaks into our house, our inner map is going to change, because now we're more aware of that this is a possibility, and that these are the things that can happen. These are the sounds that happen. This is the neighborhood or what have you. Your brain's it's now within the range of possibility. So changing that inner mapping. He gives the example too of a little boy from 9/11 who was safe, secure, loved, came from a good home. And this little boy witnessed 9/11. He witnessed people jumping out of buildings and all kinds of horrific events. And the little boy drew a drawing about it. And at the bottom, he put a trampoline. And he said, and when Dr. van der Kolk asked him about it, he said, yes, I have this trampoline here because so for next time, that they would be able to just bounce on it and then bounce back, like that they would be okay.
But he also says that this little boy was able to use his imagination because he had the support at home right away during the trauma.
Yes.
And so it was like integrated, like it happened. It's the story, it happened. And if it happens again, like when you integrate that experience of trauma, you know how to learn from it and how to prevent it in the future. You can use your imagination. Now, if you don't get the support, later in the book, I was very curious how he said that the children who were sent away from the London during the bombing to the village without their parents, they actually had a harder time dealing with the trauma after the war than the children who stay in the shelters but close to their parents who are protecting them. Like, wow, like this is exactly the opposite what we would think, right?
Well, I think a lot of this stuff goes back to attachment theory. And he addresses some of this in the book, but basically the first 7 years of a person's life, especially the first 2 years of a person's life, if there's not that healthy attachment that's formed with a parent, that starts setting that stage for that skewed internal map of how a person's going to be relating to other people and relating to the world. So, and he talks about this, like safety is a big thing. Like safety has to be there in order for a person to be resilient and in order for a person to heal. And it makes sense. If you look at kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's at the bottom. There's the basic physical needs, and then kind of in the top three or the bottom three levels of that base pyramid, that safety and security is such an important one.
And you need that to build on it with the higher levels. You can't even worry about self-actualization if you don't have the foundation. You're just, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. You're stuck at that level. So, okay. Well, looks like James is here.
Yeah, let's try and get attention.
Okay. Let's see. James, are you here? And he's having volume issues. Okay. So we're going to have him play around with it. James, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you should see a toolbar with a microphone and an up arrow.
Yeah, I think I
there you got it. Yeah.
For whatever reason, it started with no audio. So
I know
that happened to me too.
Yeah, it's weird. So James, what did you think about the book?
I liked it a lot. Probably the favorite thing was I like how he wasn't afraid to question the DSM and the whole thing of, somebody has a mental issue or trauma, let's just prescribe them Zoloft and send them on their way, instead of like actually diving into what the issue is, like he did. It was cool to see a like his perspective. I know Pete Walker, he's also a psychologist too, right?
I don't know if he's a psychologist, but he's a therapist.
Well, it was cool to see his perspective throughout the book. Although there was a lot of parts that were he goes into pretty good detail, and it was triggering, just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Let him know what you said before. Do you remember about Pete Walker's book and how this book related?
How it's kind of like a deep dive of Pete Walker's book?
Yes. And I think that I think you just absolutely nailed that. And I hadn't thought about that, but that's exactly the Pete Walker book that we read last month was all about, it was called The Tao of Fully Feeling. And it was all about understanding your emotions and really developing a good relationship with the way that you feel. And this book, The Body Keeps the Score, talks about the importance of that, but it also adds, it's like James is saying, it's an even deeper dive. It goes into like the biology and the brain chemistry
of it, which is always the first thing I ask. Why? Why does that work?
Yes.
So.
Yes, I agree. So does anybody have any takeaways that they would like to share? Or any other takeaways, I guess I should say?
Oh, God, just there's so much. I think we're going to be talking about it for a while.
There's a lot of information.
Yeah.
Well, for me, one of the most terrifying things, because I could really see myself in, there's a bunch of case study, right, in this book. So when there's this girl, she experienced lots of abuse in her childhood, and basically like she didn't really have a memory of what happened, but she was repeating that with her behavioral pattern, she was repeating the trauma. And then she's being diagnosed with like bunches of different disorders. Like, I can't even remember. I don't know, it was borderline personality disorder. She was bipolar. She was put the obstruction, some bunch of things. And then she was prescribed, of course, some medicine, and and basically the whole idea of trying to keep her under control Or another patient was, you know, having a CPT, complex PTSD reaction to what happened, and they were telling him having a psychotic breakdown, right? And trying to give him the very strong medicine to, you know, to basically put him under control. That, for me, is something that almost every survivor, especially like, you know, when you just start looking for help, can deal with. And that just breaks my heart, because I remember being that girl diagnosed with borderline, dissociating, psychotic breakdown, and I'm like, am I really that crazy? All those things just happened to me. Like, are you telling me I'm crazy?
Completely invalidating.
Right?
Yep.
And it's heartbreaking, because this book is available. Like, that's why I think, you know, if you have a therapist, tell him, read this book.
Well, and there's not a lot of information on the subject yet. So it just adds to it and makes it worse.
Well,
Yeah,
plus people are, I think, so uncomfortable even talking about trauma, because it triggers the person sitting in front of you. And if they can't handle that, they can't help you. And I think, unfortunately, that's a problem that really gets in the way a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I agree completely. And I think that's one of the challenges of a lot of mental health providers is they haven't examined their own unhealed stuff. And because this stuff just seeps out of every pore. And even while you're examining it, I mean, it just takes a while to really work through this. So we're not putting that subconsciously or unintentionally on to the other person.
What was great how he actually said that in when he was working with some of the patients, he got triggered and he had to step away from the session. And I was like, yes, this is great. Like, because, you know, you can't just disconnect from the trauma and just, you know, give people medicine or like do this. It's, you experience what the patient experiencing, and you can get triggered and you have to go and deal with things that triggered in you, because otherwise you won't be able to really impact the patient.
Or your impact will be very negative. Even if that's not the intention, it just, you know.
Yes.
Well, definitely, main takeaway is that trauma is just really confusing to most of the people still. Like, it's still like a mystery, even though we have all those evidence for it, we can explain it in so many ways, it's still confusing to people.
Yes.
We can all look depressed now.
Yeah. Well, and what you were saying about the different disorders, and I think this is what Dr. Vanderkolk was talking about too, is they're all somewhat correct. And this is something that I've talked about quite a bit on this channel too, because I've been on both sides of this, and it can, you know, a person goes into therapy or they go to a psychiatrist and they're telling everything that's going on. And they're, of course, looking at symptoms and they have to come up with a diagnosis in order to come up with a treatment plan. If insurance is going to pay, that has to happen. So they're going to be looking at all of these different symptoms. I really don't think most mental health practitioners, unless they've been on the other side of the table, I don't think that they understand how just devastating a mental health diagnosis can be for some people. And because most people leave feeling like, oh my gosh, I have so much that's wrong with me, especially if there's multiple diagnoses there. And they may or may not even be accurate. And even if they are accurate, it's not like a death sentence. And a lot of this stuff, especially if there's trauma at the core, it can be worked through. But having a patient leave and they're like, oh yeah, you've got generalized anxiety disorder, you've got persistent depressive disorder, you've got PTSD, I think borderline personality disorders in there. That's a great way to drive somebody to suicide.
And you are narcissistic, they can tell you that too. Like,
yeah.
Like this one girl with so much trauma is just described as narcissistic. And I'm like, wait, do you actually know she's narcissistic, or she's just acting out right now because she's that deeply hurt? And I know, acting out is not an excuse, but she was a patient in the facility. I'm like, you can't just put a label like this on someone. That's a human being. I think that's why I love this author, because he actually, there's this moment somewhere that he says that you have to see the human. You
Mhm.
need to see the human
Yes.
here.
Yes, the human is the organ you're treating in a way, you know.
There was a part in the book that I absolutely loved, and I feel like this is so rare in the mental health community. One of his residents had asked him, like, well, what would you call this one patient? And he was looking for a diagnosis. Like, well, would you call them borderline, schizophrenic, schizoaffective? Like, what would you call them? And his professor had said, well, actually, I'd call them Joe Smith, because that's who it is. It's Joe Smith.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
I liked that too.
I get goosebumps thinking about it, because it's such a big deal. And I get so frustrated at how that's lost. And it's so important to keep that at the forefront. So,
Yes.
Especially since most trauma has an element that's very, very directly connected to the dehumanization of a person, to feeling violated in the kinds of ways that make you feel. I mean, you could use the word shame, but it's a mixture of different things where you just feel defective and something's wrong with you. And
invalidated and
Yeah.
invisible.
and you really need to have a human being see you as a human being with that kind of compassion. Otherwise, it's just going to potentially make it a lot worse, unfortunately.
Become basically like a it's not enough that you're a victim of the abuse that happened in the past. You
Mhm.
being victimized by the society, and your body also is like
Yeah.
still kind of punishing you, because I mean your body's not there to punish you, but your body still holds on all the trauma in it. So that's another prison.
Mhm.
And it's so extremely invalidating when people cannot see this whole picture of it and how it impacts a survivor.
And
Yeah.
a lot of times when people are going through that, because I know I had a lot of very severe physical symptoms at the worst of it. And a lot of it was stuff that, all these different specialists, nobody could really pinpoint
Mm-hmm.
a problem that they could do much about, which, invalidates you about that. And then you've got this whole other so you're confronted with so much invalidation, starting with the abuse and then the cascade effect after that it's very very overwhelming. There is no human being that would not have a seriously troublesome time with something like that, because that's just how a human being will react.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to hop over to my notes here and go through some of these things. He talks about, back to attachment disorders and how this kind of plays into it, that secure attachment for children and for adults in healing, but secure attachment develops when caregiving includes emotional attunement. One of our primary needs that we must all get is knowing that we matter, especially when we are children. And this same level of a secure attachment has to be provided to a person who's been traumatized in order for them to heal, because that rapport has to be built with whatever mental health practitioner, whether it's acupuncture or yoga or EMDR or whatever. There has to be that solid rapport where the person feels safe and secure in order to start opening up and working through this stuff. Because I really don't know if there's anything more deeply personal than people sharing their trauma.
It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a joke almost right now, because you don't get that. You get the opposite of it.
Yeah.
From therapists most of the time. You basically spend the next 5 years after trauma looking for what's really wrong with you first.
Yeah.
And then when
It's
you're
like standing on the edge of a cliff and somebody gives you a shove toward the edge. You're just like, wait a second, that's not exactly gonna, I mean, it really can feel like that though.
Yeah.
My experience with therapy after I was out of my situations, it was not only was it not helpful, I really feel like it set me back in my healing. Because not only were they not able to identify trauma, they weren't even able to identify emotional and psychological abuse at all. And so there was no rapport there, because they were just treating it like, oh, this is just a bad breakup. And then I was, and you're already so confused as to what happened, and you're embarrassed and ashamed. And then to have it be made light of, or to have a practitioner, if a person starts kind of learning the different words about like narcissist or sociopath, and they go in there and they say, I was involved with a sociopath, and you have a practitioner who's like, well, now let's not use that word. And, you know, and that just cuts that cord right there. And that's, you know, trying to argue with somebody as they're trying to explain what happened to them is
when
not
you've had your reality invalidated, and that was part of the primary cause of the problem, and you go for help only to have your reality further invalidated.
Yep.
That's kind of,
it's absolutely, you know, it's incredibly invalidating, and it's crazy making, because then it's like, well, did I even experience this? Because this is so wild. I mean, it's like a Lifetime TV movie. And
gaslighting. How do you call that? Gaslighting by the therapist?
Oh, that Richard calls it the tertiary gaslighting, like third degree gaslighting.
Third degree gaslighting. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that sucks too is therapists have to be really careful, and they can't really tell you exactly what to do. They can just kind of not steer you, but they can kind of help you kind of draw your own conclusions. But when you're confused like that, you're pretty much.
Yeah, if your frontal, if your executive functioning is in the tanker because you're traumatized, you're not really in a place to make those kinds of judgment calls and decisions.
Or to think about things. And that's a very valid point, Shay. And that's one of the points he hammers home in the book time and time again, is your executive functioning is not there. So when we talk about, you know, you probably heard me talk about it before. I used to describe this as having mashed potatoes for brains, where like you just can't think in a logical, linear fashion. You're making bizarre decisions. You're just exhausted all of the time. And you know, then a person really does start feeling like, wow,
it's like having the blue screen of death in your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. I remember at work, right before, you know, I figured out about narcissistic abuse and everything. I had a lady tell me the same thing 4 times because I kept asking her in like a 15-minute period. So she was like, I need to have you sent to go get a drug test. And because I just couldn't focus. I had no ability to.
Your short-term memory flies right out the window.
Like none. Like I had Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I totally understand what you mean.
I went through divorce case in that stage.
It's scary.
Don't remember nothing from my divorce.
Yeah.
And no one recognized that I was so traumatized that.
Yep. And
lots of survivors probably like this.
Oh, I'm sure. And that's one of the hard things, right? So here you have this person who is being abused, and let's say it's an extreme situation, right, where their life is on the line. Now they're in fight or flight. They've been living in fight or flight for quite a while now. They're scared. They're terrified. They're not thinking straight. And so they're acting in ways that are erratic. And as a society, we tend to look at these people and we're like, well, you just need to leave. But to ask somebody to do that, I forget who used this analogy the other day, but it was so spot on. To ask somebody who is in fight or flight mode, who has no executive functioning going on, and who literally has their life on the line, or the life of their children on the line, to make these making major life decisions and going through major life changes. It's like asking somebody to do math while you're firing a gun at their feet.
Yeah, that's true.
Pretty much.
And just even the fear of having to handle life when you can't handle life because of the trauma, and looking to, total unfamiliarity, go walk into this great big unknown and somehow handle all this when you're in this place where you can't think and you might not be able to string a whole sentence together, that.
And you probably have other people, like there's oftentimes no sympathy, right? Mm-hmm. It's added shame, it's added embarrassment, it's added victim blaming. They generally don't have a source of support anymore. Maybe this whole relationship's burned out friends and family, and they might not even have any money. So they're just at the lowest place a human being can be. And these relationships can just be so destructive on so many levels. And that's one of the ways.
That's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Only.
Yeah. Let me hop back to my notes here. Gosh, there's so many things. Okay, well, let's talk real quick about attachment styles. He mentions the 4 different types of attachment styles, and these are attachment styles that we develop as children. And if we don't take the time to examine them as an adult, we're going to continue on with this. So the 4 different types, you have secure, avoidant, anxious, and disorganized. A secure attachment style is the child would get upset and then gets comforted when the primary caregiver returns. So if you have a young child, the mother leaves, it's going to cry. When the mother comes back, it's going to be soothed. Avoidant is the child is passive, withdrawn, and indifferent to the primary caregiver's presence or absence. This is really interesting, and tends to be very common. Well, the other 3 tend to be very common with abuse, but you can have a 6-month-old baby and the mother leaves the room. The child does not care. They don't cry. They don't look around, nothing. The mother comes back. That child's completely indifferent. Anxious is when the child screams, yells, clings, cries, and draws attention to themselves anytime that they need reassurance. They just are very anxious about that attachment. And then disorganized, this is a child who's seeking closeness, but avoiding the parent, which puts them in a scramble to which there is no solution. So they're just all over the place with
The original double bind.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. That's the kids from the foster care system. They usually have that disorganized.
Yeah. Your volumes, I can't hear you.
Really, really low.
Yeah.
It's your notes on my computer.
Yeah, don't put stuff over your microphone. Let's see. And then another point he has here is that childhood trauma, so these different attachment disorders, more often than not happen because this parent is acting upon or acting out of their own unresolved trauma. So you've got these dysfunctional parents who don't know how to properly relate to their child. They've got their own stuff going on that it's driving their own behavior. They're not aware of it. And this is how this stuff tends to be generational.
No, that's not the excuse, right? We all know that if your parents treat you wrong, that's not the excuse because they were hurt in their childhood. But
Right.
he really makes a really great point that if we just invest some money in preventing child abuse, we would save millions on drug addiction treatment later, prescription drugs later, hospitalizations, autoimmune, even freaking cancer, I think. Basically, so much would be resolved if we just took care of the child abuse.
Well, but I honestly think part of the problem is that the doctors and pharmaceutical companies make way too much money.
Yeah,
I was going to say basically the same thing. That's both the
I think we can have
the
another
thing we should do and the problem why we don't. Because
Yeah.
I think there's a live stream about that coming up one day.
Well, you know, and literally because, you know, when I was a psychiatric nurse, we used to have the drug reps come in almost every week and they would provide lunch and the doctors would get kickbacks. If you prescribe certain medication, they get a kickback for that. And that, to me, that's completely unethical. And that's been going on for many, many, many years. So it's the whole industry really needs an overhaul.
Yeah, it needs to be shaken up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
And the other thing too is if you had programs that are based on awareness and education, like you guys were saying, it's not the level of income difference is huge.
Right. It's not near as fruitful.
No, not even close. I don't know. It goes on and it's just such a tangled issue with all of that. Because even if you did do awareness classes for child abuse, at what point, at what age do you start these classes? It really can't be before the age of 18, because if you're going into schools talking about this stuff, you're not just stirring the pot, you're kicking it. And you're going to have
Maybe
a
the
ton
pot
of,
needs to be kicked.
well, maybe, but you're going to have a ton of
yeah.
really angry parents that are like, what are you teaching my kid? You're super
that's
liberal, you're this, you're that. And that it would not go over well.
No, it wouldn't.
It's almost gets me to that place when I remember when I was pregnant and you go for that pregnancy classes. I'm like, this is when they start try to model how you know, not just change diapers and breastfeed, but how you actually, this is attachment, this is important to developing in a healthy way, like just a little bit basics. And honestly, I almost feel like everyone should go through some sort of therapy when they deal with their trauma, because basically I don't know one person right now around me that didn't have some sort of trauma or neglect in their childhood. I don't know one person right now.
Yeah,
I can't say I do either.
And I think at a minimum, just the kind of these foundational skills, because if you think about attachment disorder, I mean, you know, who's going to come across that in everyday reading? Probably not the vast majority.
The only people who do are people like us who had to.
Right, to understand your life, right? And and you think about, but still, how many of us are now reading this when we're in our 40s? And how different things would have been had we read this stuff, you know, 20 years ago. So a lot of, I'm also a very big fan of kind of teaching some of these really core behaviors early on, probably, I don't know, having some sort of online classes or just so they're out there. So people that are interested in this can better understand it without having to learn the hard way.
I agree.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Let me get back to my notes. He says the researchers, I think this is what you were saying earlier, Agatha. The researchers expected that hostile and intrusive behavior on the part of the mothers would be the most powerful predictor of mental instability in their adult children, but it was the exact opposite. Emotional withdrawal has the most profound and long-lasting impact. So emotional withdrawal was more damaging than violent behavior. Emotional distance and role reversal, which is known as parentification, were specifically linked to aggressive behavior against self and others in young adults.
Yeah, that explains why the silent treatment sucks as bad as it does.
Yeah.
I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, it makes sense because that emotional instability, even if this is going to sound terrible, but even if a person is being abused, there's still that kind of
reaction to them.
Time being spent with them.
Yes.
Even if there's a connection that's being made, even if that connection is incredibly destructive. Versus emotional withdrawal, which, you know, if that's happening early on, then that child is not going to attach securely. And even if then it really sets the stage for issues. But if they're, you know, younger and then a parent just ups and leaves, a parent disowns them, a parent starts doing silent treatment, a parent, you know, really withholds affection in any way, shape, or form, that's when it can really exacerbate all of these kind of unhealed attachment issues within us, where people start chasing after the abuser of like, I need to win their love back because I can't stand it if they're doing this. And a lot of that stuff, it's unresolved attachment trauma from when we were young.
And that becomes the normal. So you don't know what you're missing if you're missing it.
And you think any connection is better than no connection. Even if it's a one-sided thing.
Yeah. It's
biologically we are wired that if we are ignored as a child, basically we die.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that is completely against everything, against our DNA to be ignored and abandoned.
Yes. And they had done studies with babies in Russian orphanages and with touching them, and because they had so many children there, and the people that were running the orphanage, you know, they couldn't get around to each one. So it was basically the bare minimum attention of feeding and diaper changing. And the failure to thrive or infant mortality was really high in these orphanages. And they finally realized this is what's going on. It was very similar. This was the same concept was identified here in the United States not that long ago, just a couple of decades ago, with babies in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, where, because here you have a baby that was taken away from its caregiver right away. They're put in, an incubator to stay warm, and they're not getting any of that skin to skin contact. And there were nurses that began realizing these children are not doing well. And so then they were making it a point to take them out and just hold them while they were doing paperwork or doing anything. And those children that were getting more skin to skin contact and just that reassurance, those were the ones that were healing from infection faster, that were, they were growing, they were thriving. So it's such a big thing to be emotionally safe. Yeah. To be hugged.
Hugged, cared for. So this is crazy because I remember when I was healing, like at the very first beginning, I remember I'm like, if someone could just come and squeeze me, like I had that need, literally, like just squeeze me, because you need it. So I got a weighted blanket. So by the way, if you're a survivor and you don't have anyone to hug you, get a heavy blanket, get an electric blanket. Go get a massage. There's so many things you can do for yourself to provide that kind of care and touch, and you need it because we need it.
Yeah.
That's what I did too. That's very good advice.
I got my first massage and it was amazing. It was just from somebody else, like, putting their hands on you in a loving way that's not necessarily sexual, but
it's actually better if it's not for something like this.
Just that physical touch. Aerial yoga can often help with this because you're in this kind of like parachute type swing.
Cocoon.
Like a hammock. Yeah, you're in this cocoon and it's like you're being hugged and it feels so amazing. So aerial yoga, stuffed animals can help. Live animals can help. Hugging a cat or a dog, making that connection to another living being is very valuable. Let me hop over to the chat here and see, have you guys come across any questions that you feel we should address?
Oh, there was a question there before. Hold on. I think I'm going to find it quickly.
Okay, I'm going to address this one while you're looking. This is from Sebastian, who had mentioned basically why do I keep attracting these psychopathic women? And you probably heard me talk about this before, Sebastian, if you've been to this channel before, of it's not so much about what we attract, it's what we're attracted to, because we don't have control over who's attracted to us, and any one of us is going to attract a wide range of people. But the bigger question to answer is, what about these women is so attractive to you? And generally, these kinds of personalities, they're very intense, they're very charismatic, and they come on very strong. And they can seem like a lot of fun, and because it's that intensity. So there's that connection, and all of things move really fast, and right away it can seem so amazing, but the next thing you know, your life is blown apart. And I think that's the thing that most, if a person hasn't been through something like this, they don't understand that. They just kind of think, abusive people are, mean all the time, and that they look mean and all of this. And that's so not the case. If anything, they come across as the perfect partner right away. And then things start to turn because they tend to give a lot of attention and a lot of affection right away. And to a person who either hasn't had that in a while, or if they didn't have that from childhood, that kind of stuff just feels intoxicating. When somebody is just showering you, they're complimenting you, they make you the center of their world. And the next thing you know, things shift and all of that affection's being pulled away. And now you're in the scramble to try to get it back. And then your whole life just ends up imploding and you don't know how or why. And
when it comes to that whole sweet mean cycle, the sweet is part of the abuse. It's not separate from it.
Yes.
It's not, and that's hard. That's a very difficult thing to confront in your world, because it means everything has to change, and it brings up every fear you've ever, I mean, I honestly can't think of a harder thing for a human being to go through. I mean, it's a, you know, saying to somebody, well, just leave, that's, it's so much more complex than that. And it's biological. I mean, you know, it's not just a choice in your head, especially if your head's not working. If you've got mashed potato brain and you, it's very diminishing to suggest to people, well, you should just leave, and implying it's your fault because you're there. That's,
yeah, right. Like there's so much more going on. And he talks about at the end of my notes about how to heal from this. And such a big part of that healing is we've got to be able to develop that self-awareness. And like Shay is saying, you know, if a person's in the thick of this, they're not at that place yet, because they're still in fight or flight mode. And so no healing can happen until a person can get themselves to safety and security. And
if you don't even know what that feels like, if you
Yes.
haven't experienced it, even having somebody give you the idea that there's this elusive thing and that you could have it on the other side of a lifetime of
yeah,
Well,
it's
those,
just, it's
They're
not
ready for it
fathomable
yet.
at that point. You have
No.
to do a certain amount of healing before you even get to the point where you can
Right.
embrace that that's a possibility you can move towards, let alone take the actions. I mean, it's
yeah,
so much more complex.
it is.
biologically, like I just pull out my note because I remember writing it. Biologically, like they made research when they find out that scared animals will always return home regardless of how safe the home was.
Yes, I thought that was such an interesting part in the book. He was talking about the study that was done with mice, and
Yeah, that was
So-
with mice and with
Yeah.
the dogs. Remember the one with the dogs?
I don't remember the one with the dogs.
The only way to get the dog out of the cage, if they were conditioned to get
Mm.
abused, if they were in an unescapable first conditions of unescapable abuse, which we are when you are in a domestic violence, it is basically like unescapable, or when you are a child. The
Mhm.
only way to get the dog out of the cage, it was to drag them out repeatedly.
Yeah, they were even abusing them with the cages then open, and they would not
wouldn't leave.
leave.
They wouldn't leave. So it is this is how impactful it is. And I think if you are and you know, even if you are still now in an abusive relationship, don't be mad at yourself. Forgive yourself. I mean, do everything you can to leave when you're ready and get all the support you need. But if you're not ready, don't be mad about yourself, because your biology is against you. And if
And
you
don't,
go ahead, James, you can go.
sorry.
No, it's fine, because that's all I can say. It's
Yeah, just don't force it is what I was going to say.
I think there's a big part having to do with awareness. So let me back up for the people that haven't read the book or they're not familiar with the dog and the rat study. The dog study is that they had a dog that was put in a cage, and the cage was locked, and the dog was repeatedly zapped. And it got to the point, at first it would try to leave, it would try to get away, and then it realized it couldn't. And so then it would just sit there, and it would just take these electrical zaps to the point where, it would urinate and defecate on itself, and it was just stuck there, and it just sat there. And so then I really wish studies like this were not legal. I don't even see how they still are, but regardless. So then they opened up the door to the cage, and they continued to shock the dog, and the dog didn't move, and it would just continue to sit there and urinate and defecate. They took a dog that they had not previously shocked. They shocked it, and that dog bolted immediately from the cage. And so that whole experiment was showing the learned helplessness that happens when a person, this is all that they know, and they feel like they can't get away. And so for people in abuse, the more of an investment, whether it's emotional or physical or financial, that they have with this person, the more that learned helplessness is going to be there, because it's just this feeling of futility of, I can't get away. I've got kids with this person. I have no money. Where am I going to go? It's just, it's hopeless. And so then they sit there and they just take it. And the deterioration in their health, continues. It goes further and further.
Well, not only that, you're often being criticized and actually cut down, so whatever confidence you had is being absolutely dismantled on top of that, which is no small thing. I mean, it's to expect somebody to just say, oh, I think I'm going to leave now.
Yeah, it's not so easy.
No.
Right. And then the second study had to do with rats, and they had rats that they had a rat's nest that was not comfortable. It was kind of bare minimum. And they had, it was played loud music in the background. So it was very not a conducive environment. And then they had something along the lines of then they gave these rats the ability to leave. Oh, then they showed them a nice warm nest where it was nice and quiet, like this ideal rat's nest. And then they they startled them. And the rats, instead of going to the nest that had food, that it was a solid nest, that it was warm and quiet and inviting, they ran back to what they knew, which was this chaotic nest. And people are very much the same way. We are driven to that level of homeostasis. We're driven to go towards what we know, even if what we know isn't good. But our brain, because it's a weird way that our brain tries to keep us safe. It's sort of like going with the devil you know versus the devil you don't.
It's better to know where the good berries and the predators are if where is biologically wired into us to be perceived as safety. I mean, it just is.
Yeah.
And another problem is it's the cycle of abuse it's not like the dog that just gets shocked initially and they just bolt. It's a slow process. So
yes.
And you're being dosed with relief. That's a huge, people don't realize how being mistreated and then being given this relief, that creates an addiction to the relief, not to the abuse. Nobody is addicted to abuse. It's the relief from it that can only come from this person who's been doing the harm. You want that. And that's one of the reasons why we want that closure and we want to gain that understanding and be heard, because it's constantly being denied, and we just get microdosed with little bits of relief, which is why the nice is part of the abuse. It is not actual niceness. And that's it's a very big thing to wrap your head around when you're healing from something. That's words just don't even.
It sucks.
Yeah, it does.
And for people that are in it, they see the niceness as, oh, things have now turned a corner. And it's that hope, it's that carrot that's dangled in front of them, or they're like, oh, well, now we're back to, it's the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Well, now I've got Mr. Hyde, who's or Dr. Jekyll, who's the good guy, and things are going to be calm. And this is where that anxiousness and that instability comes from, because when things are really bad, and then they're followed by the relief of the good. Well, this is how the trauma bonds happen. Because then you have a person who's both the traumatizer and the savior all in one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they're the only ones able to provide this relief. Plus you've usually been isolated by this point. So you don't have any place else to get it, which is part.
And you have a child for
Yeah.
it.
And you are sleep deprived and stressed out. And I mean, there is so much packed into this that to ever expect somebody to just say, oh, I'm ready to just leave now. That's why it takes so much pain. It has to get so bad that the only relief is facing all the fears of leaving. And that's just incredible respect to everybody who has made that choice and walked into healing, because that's huge.
Yeah, letting go of that hope is probably the toughest part for me to me, because you get lulled when they're nice. You get lulled back into that sense of like, oh, okay, well, maybe I finally got through to him this last time I talked to him about the abuse, and it's just not true. And
this is also this is also how like this erosion of self happens. So
Mhm.
when there's the calm and then there's the storm, and this is how we are all wired this way, to try to navigate these different environments that we have some sort of investment in, whether it's with our parents, whether it's with a significant other or friends or at work or you name it. And so when we're trying to keep this relationship afloat when things are really bad, we're trying to figure out, okay, how can I make things good again? And this is when we're like, okay, well, this is what's so confusing, because it's sort of like, well, now I just got yelled at and berated because I made a pizza and it's in the middle of the summer and it was hot out, and I got yelled at because it's even hotter in the house because I just made a pizza. So, okay, lesson learned, not make pizza in the summertime. Then 2 days later, you get yelled at because you didn't make a pizza.
There's nothing to eat.
Because there's nothing to eat. You didn't make a pizza. It's Friday night.
Life in a double bind.
Yep, we should have pizza. And so even if the abuser's not doing this stuff intentionally, it's still causes this feeling of anxiousness, like you're a sheet in the wind, of you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, because you never know what you're going to do is going to be wrong. And when the abuse is going to, when the mean part of the abuse is going to start up again. When these relationships end, when a person starts looking back and they feel so empty, like a shell of themselves, this is often why, because to try to keep calm in their life, they've been erasing parts of themselves, not realizing that that's what they're doing. And that's a whole nother level of like,
Right.
A mind scramble.
Afterwards, you're like, who the hell am I? Like, what do I like to do?
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
Preference? What's that?
Yeah.
Wrong.
I have choices now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the things he talks about too with, let me go down to, I'm going to go down to some healing. Yeah.
Healing, please.
Yes.
Please, because I'm getting
okay, so let me talk about this, because I think this is important, and this is something we definitely see here. Because trauma can be so isolating, it can be so confusing, and it can make a person feel so profoundly alone because other people do not understand, for all of the reasons everybody's been talking about tonight. He says one of the problems with this is then people start seeking out comfort in groups that are based around abuse, or for like Vietnam veterans or any war veterans, they start seeking around the company of those who have been in that specific war, because those people get them. The downside to that is that's the only thing, this is the thing that everybody's relating to each other around. So there's not this real sense of individuality, and there's not kind of this healthy connection that's being forged. Mm-hmm. So it's the only thing that the group can really talk about is the abuse. And then that can kind of keep that person stuck in it. And I'm not saying that support groups about abuse are bad. I think there's definitely a time and place for them, but it really is important to not get stuck there, and to start at a place when you're down the road further in healing, to really reconnect with other people based around your individuality, things that make you you. So for Agatha, that would be painting and many, many things that she's interested in.
It's very important to expand your world gradually. I mean, baby steps are just fine, but just to make your canvas of choices bigger, and to experiment, to see what you like, and to connect with people where abuse has nothing to do with it, so that you can learn all these different ways that connection can be, and start experiencing that. And
kind of fun to do that too.
Yeah, it is, but it can take time to get to that point, and that's where a support group is helpful to get you to that spot. But then it's important to not to ditch support groups. I'm not criticizing. I mean, I think they're very helpful. I mean, that's the validation you need to even get to that launch pad where you can start expanding your world.
Yeah,
but it's important
to explore.
Yeah, you have to feel safe enough to do that. Yeah,
I think it's great to balance the friends that understand where you come from, and what you dealt with, and friends that going where you want to go.
Or just share your joy about things that give
Yeah.
you joy and make that the basis. That's what the connection is. It doesn't have to be a,
Yeah.
And realize
Mhm.
that not like what you guys are saying about having different, when you have different friend groups, realizing like with anything, right? So like if Agatha's really into painting, if she has a friend who is totally uninterested in painting, who doesn't understand anything about it, who doesn't want to understand anything about it, her talking to them about painting, there's not going to be this connection there. So that's not the person to go to for emotional support or for creative frustration or creative breakthroughs, because they don't get it. And it's the same thing with abuse. We have to realize that other people who haven't gone through this just don't get it. And to be very careful about who we're sharing these deeply personal parts of ourselves with, because it's hurtful enough if you have a hobby and you're sharing it with somebody and they're not interested. It's profoundly damaging if you're sharing, deep personal trauma and they blame you for it.
I'll give you well-intended bad advices that will keep you just in the trauma, in repeating, the trauma.
Yeah. There was a part too here in the notes. Shay, I think it was you that was just talking about support groups and the validity that can come from that. And he gives 2 examples in the book that I absolutely love. And he says, when we have naming offers the possibility of a different kind of control. If you've been hurt, acknowledging and naming what happened to you can give you back quite a bit of control. And he gives the example of Helen Keller, who was born, deaf and mute. And she was very alone in her world. And the breakthrough for her was when she realized that her teacher was writing words on her hand and she was able to connect to something. And it was the word water. And Helen Keller had said, like, that day she learned a lot of words and she learned the word I. So it was that sense of identity and that sense of self. And with abuse, this understanding of the terminology, of understanding about manipulation and all of the different problematic behaviors that go, a gaslighting and projection and triangulation and invalidation, all of these terms that go along with it, give us back power, because then we're able to say, this is what happened to me, instead of trying to explain to a mental health professional or anybody being like, I just don't know. I don't know. Like you just can't pinpoint it because you don't have the words for it.
Well, I take it deeper because this is something that I really struggle with in my past, when people don't understand why verbal abuse is that harmful to us. Our identity, who we are, is all like a conversation inside of us. Like who we are, it's like this conversation, and people are, how we interact with people. It's basically, of course there's a physical touch and all the different ways of interacting with people, but it's the conversation we're having with them. So when verbal abuse is not harming your body, it's harming your identity that way so much, because it's interjecting into this conversation all those wrong things. And then the conversation you have about yourself, it becomes about how wrong everything is about you. And that's why the abused survivor of verbal abuse, or like psychological abuse, because that's the same, that's the conversation, when your perception is questions of everything all the time and you don't believe anything you say, basically, right?
Yeah.
So those two things, it's like you're losing basically sense of your humanity at some point. You get so freaking confused. You don't know where to start, and when you end it, you don't know. That's why it's so important to find there's this one place here when he said that lots of healing is about just giving someone a space, because they already survived. If you survived, you just need that space to slowly recover who you really are. And just so basically in a therapist's office, that's when the first, lots of healing happens, when you can talk in a good way about yourself. And you recover those pieces of yourself, and you create new pieces, because you can create with how you say, change things about yourself.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize that the tower that hurt that comes from the words. And
Yes.
my head is like, what? Why can't you see that?
Yeah.
Well, there's even that, what was it? Emoto, the Japanese man who did the study where he photographed molecular structure of water when it was being, like words were put on the containers, and it was a picture with the word love or the word hate. And it actually affected the structure, where you could see all this disorder and ugliness in the structure with hate-based words, and when you had love-based words, there was beauty. And it just, I mean, you can't look at something like that and not realize how impactful words, and even just your energy of attitude, if somebody's not even saying something but they're just giving you, like, those dirty looks, and that's damaging. I mean, it's not just, tune it out and get over it. I mean, it actually has an impact that isn't given enough credence, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
Makes
agree.
you feel faulty.
Yeah.
And real quick in the chat, Joe, thank you for the live stream donation. He says, you're a very kind person. Thanks for you and all your team do for us. So thank you so much for your kind words. And I think we're all glad to be here. So
We survived. We showed them.
That's right.
that's right.
We show them by being happy. So.
Yes. Kevin asks, is the Dr. Emoto the guy who would yell at rice? I don't know if that was the same study. And I actually don't know if either one of these studies have how valid they've actually been proven to be.
I'm not sure as far as what kind of peer review or any of that.
Sounds fun though.
I think that there's a lot to that for sure. I mean, I know that they've done studies with plants, talking to your plants, playing music. I've got a plant right here that's not doing well. And every time I water it, I make it a point to just be very loving towards it. Because I do think those things matter even to plants. So, yeah. Oh, we have another live stream donation. Thank you so much. NM Kempt 5. Good deal. Thank you. We appreciate it.
They need to just keep the plant by the camera for all the live streams for the next month, and it should do a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I hope this guy comes back. I don't know what's going on with him.
Are we going back to healing?
Sure.
Forward.
Agatha, was that your favorite part of the book?
Yes, because I think, we give so much attention to narcissists and abusers, and I like when the attention goes on us, and especially what, benefits us. There was this thing here I super duper love, and I'm gonna just say it how I wrote it, because that's what I wrote.
Okay.
Oh God, help me. Healing is about learning and understanding our inner experience and becoming friends with it. I love that.
Me too.
I'm like, damn, yes.
Yep.
And so he gives so many different ways and options for healing. I'm gonna get excited. Can I get excited? So there's like a drama thing you can do, like you can do a whole landscape of like your mother who was dysfunctional and your father. And I know this is not exciting, but then you create this ideal mother and you can talk to her, and the ideal father, and they can talk to you. Like, that's kind of group therapy. This is freaking awesome. I forgot how they call it, but it was great. Psychobody, therapy, psychobody.
Taboo.
I don't remember, but it was like psychobody therapy something. It was fun. It's great. I loved it. And then what it provides. So this is why it's exciting. It's not because you just I love activities. Activities are fun, but this is the activity that actually will provide you healing in your body, because your body keeps the score, and the score is like all this hurt, anger, pain, grief, whatever, fear. It's in your body, in different places in your body. And when you do that, I kind of call it like creating this emotional landscape. When you put your father here or your mother here or your friend or abuser or not abuser, whatever, don't do it by alone at home. I don't think that would be great. I want to do it with someone, I'm not going to do it alone. But anyway, it's supposed to, when you're because you'll be facing them, not just with your head and what you're saying and in your memory, but you actually, your body is faced with them. And it's funny because we're pretending, we're faking it, but actually works. So there's something being released in your body.
So you're talking about, okay, so let me back up and make sure I understand you. I do not remember this part in the book.
Because
I know you mentioned it the other day.
I have the newest version, people.
I don't know. Maybe I don't. I swear I do not remember this part. So, okay, so what you're saying is that there's this type of like role playing that you can do where you have other people, you come up with this idea of what what you needed in a mother and what your version of a perfect mother and father would look like. And then you let these people know this is your role. This is the part that you would play. And then they would interact with you in that role of this perfect parent.
Yes. But it starts from just the dysfunctional parents here. And there is a witness always. So there's like a facilitator of the group, and it says witness, like, because they ask you a question like, so how do you feel standing in front of your mother right now? And you can say like, oh, nothing, because you Black, you don't know what to say. And the witness will say, well, I can see you are very tense in your shoulders. And that moment will actually get the person like, ha, I am tense on my shoulders. And actually just connecting to that feeling helps you to feel that emotion that causing that tense shoulder. And something gets released, and you can say, I was always angry with your mother for not protecting me from father. You can actually say that, because the witness will be asking you like, would you like to say something to your mom? So you got to say it. And then you got to say things to your father if you want to. And then at some point when you're ready, you can, create like, oh, I would like to have my ideal mother to come to the room right now. So then you pick someone, you say, now you stand next to me on my right side. And then you interact with them. And there was this scene that like freaking moved me so much, because at the end of that role playing, the ideal mom and dad, like they hugged each other with that, the woman that was the daughter of them. Mm-hmm. And they said, if I was your ideal father, I would always love and respect and cherish you and enjoy. And the mother side would always protect you, like things like this. And so much happened in acting out, like that, what happened and what you would like to happen. Mm-hmm. And actually it rewrites something in your brain, and it frees you up from this emotional heaviness that is collected through your body. And every survivors, I know, because I'm not gonna say no ever, but most of us have either back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain, headaches, stomach aches, diarrhea, all this stuff, all of that. I've heard all those things from so many people. Mm-hmm. And it's really related to all those different, I can't believe you didn't have it in your book. That's like
but I know what you're talking about. There's it's called psychodrama is what you're describing. And the whole premise behind this therapy is that it's literally a drama. So you're acting out this play, and different people have different roles. And then the whole goal is to get as close to the original emotion, the original painful emotion as possible, and bring that to the surface. And then the whole theory is once that, it's kind of this catharsis. So once that's brought up, then that situation is resolved. And then kind of what you were describing too, of like paying attention to where this emotion is in your body, that's more of like a Gestaltist approach of being very in tune, and then kind of using some like visualization of like, well, what color is this emotion? Is it, does it have a name? Does it have a shape? How big is it? Really kind of visualizing it. And then, can you scoop this emotion out? Can you touch it? Can you throw it behind you? What can you do with that? I do think that there is power in that. I don't think I know I didn't give those therapies as much credit as they deserve until I read this book, because Dr. van der Kolk talks in here about the body keeps the score. And one of the ways that it literally does that is when we go into fight or flight, our system is flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. So that adrenaline is like, you got it, it's the flight. And then the cortisol it's a stress hormone. And so these chemicals are just stuck in our body. And the only way to get them out is to move your body, to literally discharge them with some sort of activity. This is why going for a run, doing something physical, screaming, in your car, when obviously not screaming at anybody, but just screaming, getting these things out of your body can help to release a lot of this built up.
Especially if you spend a lot of time in the freeze response, that's very helpful. Just to do anything physical, whatever, you go for a walk with music on, anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Hey, it was chapter 18 and 297 on the Kindle edition, Dana.
Oh, on Kindle edition.
That's awesome.
Okay, real quick, let me just remind people who are just coming in here what we're discussing. Book club is the last Thursday of every month. We do a different book every single month. You can find the list at thriveafterabuse.com/book club. This month, we are discussing the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It is a timeless classic. It's about trauma, understanding all of the neurological and biological and psychological components that make up trauma. So next month, we are going to be discussing the book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson, if you'd like to read along. And again, all of the books that we're reading for 2019, along with, I need to start getting my notes back up on my website on a regular basis, but all of that's at thriveafterabuse.com/book club. So so back to healing. Was there any other takeaways that anybody had?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead, jump in there.
That's my favorite part. I'm sorry. So there was another really I think it's called internal family systems. When instead of like how Pia Melody does the inner child work and the inner parent.
Mm-hmm.
So here you have inner protector. I forgot all those names, but that was really interesting because you also you see different patterns of your behavior, like the different thoughts, the different conversation you're having with yourself, and your reaction to different things, different happenings, or what people say to you, and you can become more mindful in dealing with it. And it kind of starts from just acknowledging that you survived and you say thank you for protecting me. You have this conversation with your protector. Thank you for protecting me. Thank you for.
That reminds me of parts therapy.
Yeah, that's similar. Yeah, so here you kind of put it it's like internal family systems, because it's all your parts of you, it's the family, protector, guides, there was different names. I don't remember exactly, but that was very interesting.
Are you talking about the manager, firefighter part?
Yes.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yep. It was cool, right? You feel like you have a whole village of people trying to protect you in your head. And it's so crazy because I remember probably 2 years after I wasn't living anymore with my abuser, when I had a whole crowd in my head. That's what they were thinking. I have dissociative personality disorder because I had all those voices, right? But it was just my brain trying to really protect me and work out what happened. And I'm that would be so cool if I sat down with the therapist then and thank you for protecting me, say to that part of me. That would quiet it down, because I was blah, 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 because, we have to protect me, right, all the time. Mm-hmm. But that's just so great. So I don't know. I love it. Sorry.
I agree with you.
Part of it is the inner critic too, because I had kind of a similar thing with certain situations. You could hear what the abuser would say to you in that situation. Mm-hmm. And it makes you feel like you're crazy, but it's just you're trying to fight them off and protect it.
I think those are parallel, how you call it?
Parallel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, theories, when they kind of address the same phenomena, but they just call it differently. So if you didn't like Pia Melody work, that child, critic, whatever, you may like this one. This one more if you're a business person, I think you will like it more. or something, you know.
Well, plus there may be more than one inner critic. I mean, you may have different, there could be a crowd of inner critics in there, and I think it's very helpful.
Yeah, like for me, it was like my father and my ex were the main two that I had. So yeah, it's pretty common, I'm sure, to have more than one.
Could you identify the different voices, James? When that inner critic would kick on, you're like, wow, that's my dad or that's my ex?
Yeah, after a while, obviously at first, because it was the closest, it was my ex. But then after she kind of went away, I realized it was also my dad too. That was still different situations, but you know, would criticize or just invalidate or you know, things like that. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. He talks in this book about towards the end with healing, about developing a healthy relationship with all of our different emotions. And one of the quotes that I absolutely love is from Rumi, and it says, this being human is a guest house. Every morning is a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Treat each guest honorably. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And to me, I just love that so much, because all of this stuff, especially this uncomfortable stuff that starts surfacing as we go through our healing, like you were saying, James, this inner critic voice of, oh my gosh, that's my father, and oh my gosh, that's my ex, and all of these uncomfortable realizations and emotions that surface, they all have some sort of message, and they can really guide us more towards what needs to be resolved and healed in our life. If we can see them that way, it can really change our relationship with healing, because it is so uncomfortable to stare into that pain and to even experience it.
Yeah. I don't mean to make it sound like it's some easy thing, because it's not, but by challenging it, it kind of you validate yourself, and it gives you a better understanding of yourself, like you were just saying.
Yes. And one of the things he also mentions is, he says, once you start approaching the body and your perceptions with curiosity rather than fear, everything shifts. So it's kind of not being so wrapped up in every single emotion and experience, and not identifying. It's kind of giving ourselves some emotional distance from our emotions, from what we're experiencing, and looking at them through more of that lens of curiosity of, oh, okay, well, where did this come from? And why is this here? And what potentially needs to be resolved or worked through? These are all different keys to your healing and keys to better understanding yourself. And he had said, you know, there is no healing. Like, there has to be self-awareness before healing can even happen.
Yeah, and being interested in yourself, and the curiosity is a big deal. When you're curious about the makeup of your inner landscape and you interact with it, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
That's the difference between self-acceptance and self-abandonment to me. That's how I experienced this shift, is that, especially that Rumi quote was one of my favorite things in the book too. That's very much how my emotional experience is today versus when I used to just reject, I don't, would push my parts of myself away that are now welcome. And it's when you get to that bridge where you just even asking yourself, is that true? Or just giving a little space with mindfulness, that where you realize thoughts are just thoughts, and they are not you. and you can question them. You can, you can have a conversation with it, and you're in charge of that. It's not,
Yeah.
There's something profound that happens when you start doing that. It's like you cross a bridge, and the whole experience of the world changes. At least it did for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I wanted to point out something too. When people ask about, oh, these abusers, can they change? This is a lot of the healing that a person would have to go through if there was some sort of trauma involved. And I hope that you guys can see this process requires ongoing introspection and sitting with pain and working through this. And not everybody is interested in that, and not everybody is able to do that. And that's one of the challenges with narcissism, is that they're not in reality. They're at the center. They're always right. Their reality is what they say it is. And so when a person's not even in reality to the point where it's almost like a level of functional psychosis. They're just making up things as it goes along in order to keep their ego in check. There's no working with that.
Yeah.
Like, a person has to be in reality. They have to be able to get to a place where they're comfortable with reality. And that, for any of us, is incredibly difficult, because there's always going to be things that make us comfortable that we're going to be running from. But the more that we can make peace with reality and make peace with our emotions that surface, the smoother our life is going to run, and the happier we're going to be, because we're living a life from a place of authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And you befriend, it's not just you're at peace with your emotion, but you're friends with your emotion.
Yeah.
That's what I love about it.
Yes. Thank you.
Hello.
You're right.
Welcome, joy. Hello. Welcome, sadness. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
this is the experience of being alive. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
this gonna sounds freaking crazy, but like last
No,
week,
not at all.
I had anxiety attack, and I called Dana. I had anxiety attack. That was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was the first one. I didn't hold back. I felt it. It was just in a great moment, and I got all those emotions that I was able to identify for the freaking first time. I said freaking, by the way. I said freaking first time.
Yeah.
It was great. It was great. And I'm like, life of a survivor is amazing. You have those weird moments when you have people panic attack.
Yeah.
And somebody who isn't interested in their inner experience can't offer an interest in yours. That
Nope.
they just can't.
That is so spot on. Absolutely. Especially like we were talking about earlier, if a person hasn't worked through their own stuff. And again, I don't even think most people even start realizing that this exists until they're in their 40s. It's something profound happens, their life just breaks, and then they're forced to start working through this stuff. So, it's interesting. So I'm taking this crisis and trauma class, and there's so many different exercises that we do there. And one of the biggest ones is to pay attention to what's surfacing within us when somebody else is in crisis, and to not jump into either judgment or sympathy, and to stay in that empathy mode with healthy boundaries, so we can be present. Because if we're jumping into sympathy, that's both sympathy and judgment are distancing. It's like, oh, this is just happening, basically this wouldn't happen to me. This is only happening to you. I'm terribly sorry for you, right? And when we panic and other emotions, uncomfortable emotions come up in other people, and we don't know what to do, we tend to default into sympathy and try to soothe them, because we want this discomfort that we're experiencing to stop.
Yep.
So, and just letting other people have their emotions and validating them is so huge. If they're having this complete meltdown and they're like, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm full of rage, all of these things, to just sit there instead of trying to soothe them, just letting them express that and validating them. Yes, I can understand why you would be angry and full of rage and full of sadness and full of fear.
Yeah.
And
You have to be able to hold that space for
Yes.
yourself before you can hold it for someone else.
and to be aware of when this stuff starts surfacing in you, so we're not trying to, so then things don't get all tangled up and we're,
Yeah.
you know,
It's that self-validation that, you know, starts there. Like, you don't just validate your opinion on like what you want, but you want to start self-validating your emotional experience. And if
Mhm.
you can do that, that's like huge step in your healing. Huge.
Mhm.
yeah,
That's when things were just like dominoes start unraveling for you, I think, when you start validating your emotional experience.
I agree completely. Yep. And Daniel Ray mentions here in the chat, he says, yeah, Brene Brown speaks of holding time for another person. And yes, it's so interesting too, because when you get to this certain stage in healing, so much of this stuff seems so simplistic, right? Like just just understand when you're angry that it's okay to be angry, and that when you're happy, it's okay to be happy. And like understanding how these different emotions surface within you. And then when they surface within somebody else, to just allow that to happen. And all you just need to do is just sit there. If they want you to sit there with them, like you don't need to fix them. You don't need to do anything other than just let them work through these things. It sounds so simplistic, but it's so difficult to actually strip away all of this garbage that's been put on us over the years about how we should or shouldn't feel and how we should or shouldn't interact with other people and all of this stuff. It's wild when you just strip it back and, you know,
complex journeys to simplicity. I see that with a lot of things connected to healing. And it's like comes when you get through all of these layers and it's just like, oh, it's the simple thing. It's almost obvious, you know. Yeah.
And real quick here, Sebastian says, how do you put a narcissistic bipolar girlfriend in front of a therapist or a psychologist? You don't.
Nope.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
One of the biggest things, parts in healing, is truly understanding what you have control over. And all we have control over is our actions. We don't have control over somebody else. And so staying in a relationship thinking, I just need to drag them to treatment and get them fixed, and then I'll have this wonderful relationship with them, that's a fantasy. And it's, your life will change when you realize that, because it's there. I hope you've been hearing when we're talking about doing all of this inner work to fully heal. This is an extensive process. This isn't 3 to 5 sessions in therapy. This is years, if not decades.
Or lifelong.
Lifelong. It really is. It's
huge investment. Yeah. Of time and energy and
desire. Like there has to be this ongoing motivation to be introspective and self-reflective. And Agatha and I were talking about this the other day about how, you know, it's kind of rare to come across people that are super interested in self-improvement and personal growth. And, you know, she'll mention a book and I'm like, oh yeah, oh my God, I love that book. I read this, you know, but and vice versa. And that is so rare because most people, they don't pick up a book after they graduate from high school or college. And
or they pick up to change someone else's.
Or yes.
That's
or,
another thing, sorry.
Or college.
And yes. And then that's how they get stuck. Right. And so that's why a lot of these videos about narcissists, they get the most views. And because people want to figure out what's wrong with my partner. How do I change them? They need to be fixed.
You have to figure it out.
Well, you do. That's definitely a very valid, that's the entry point. That's, people have to understand that. But most people don't get to the place in healing where they're doing all of this inner work. I thought I had healed and had learned all of the lessons I needed to learn until it wasn't until I started my YouTube channel and I began hearing from so many people in comments of, oh, Dana, I really wish you would have talked about X, Y, and Z, or, oh, Dana, you know, this, that, and the other. And I thank God for those criticisms of my work, because I was so caught off guard. I'm like, what on earth are they talking about? What do they mean? What do they mean boundaries? What are they talking about with codependency or empath or any of this stuff? I had no idea. And then that led to this whole other rabbit hole. So this stuff, it's not a straight line.
No.
And people have to really be interested in going down this path in order to, they have to keep going, because these pieces aren't just laid out in front of them. They have to really dig for them.
You
Yep.
know what reminded me? Just
Huh.
when we met, we started talking first time, that was like a year ago about this time. I thought I'm already healed. And then I did all those 70 painting, whatever, for the book we work on.
Mm-hmm.
And during those painting, other parts of me healed. And I'm like, this is a different me now than I was a year ago. It's crazy. So I honestly feel like the main advice about healing is it's in layers. It will take as much time as it will take.
Yeah.
It's you can't predict it. And I guess the other thing is that this is what I think is really important. I think people forget, because getting injured, being abused hurt as crazy, was suffering, it was harmful, and it was painful. Healing sometimes will hurt more.
Yeah.
It will. It's in when you break your bone, when you get injured, you are often told after surgery that your full recovery will be painful, and the pain of the recovery is greater often than the whole pain of the injury. And I think people don't want to hear that. That's why and I think therapists, psychologists don't want to hear that too, because they don't want to deal with the messy, painful process of healing. They want to give you a pill. They want to give you, do the IBCD and you'll be fine. They want to just come and talk about it every week, you'll be fine. They want to give you those easy ways, but there is no easy way like this. I mean, it's really simple, but it's through the pain.
Yeah.
And
Getting comfortable with discomfort is a very powerful thing to reach for.
Well said. Yeah.
That's been one of the biggest things for me, is just to welcome what is. It ends so much battle with reality and battle with myself. Yes. And it's much more, even when something is very hard, there's a sense of inner peace under it when you can just welcome the experience and appreciate whatever it's there for.
There's a comment here in the chat from Sweetbriar who says, holding space with someone while they vent, because time is love, even for adults. And yes, I do think that that's important. And when a person is going through abuse and there's so much going on with them, it can help to let others know what you need. So letting them know, I don't need advice. I don't need you to try to fix me. I don't need you to even say anything. I just need to vent. And I just really need you to give me a hug and tell me that I'm going to figure all this out. So letting them know, because most people, when we put this heaviness out there, they don't know what to do with it. And I'm totally guilty of this too. They go into fixing mode and advice mode, and then it causes overwhelm. And then people are like, no, I don't want to do any of that. I just need to be heard.
Oh, you forgot your brain's not working either. So you can't even hear it first.
Yeah. And so, I think there's a lot of validity in just asking another person. If you're seeing somebody, that even a loved one who is having some sort of crisis, it just helps to set people up for success if the people involved are able to communicate what they need or what they're offering. So if you can say, would you like to talk about this, or do you need somebody to listen?
Or do you just want me to sit here with you?
Yes. What do you need from me right now? What can I do to help?
And if you don't know what to say, don't say anything. It's fine.
Yeah. And letting them know, I don't know what to say. I just want you to know that I care about you. And it's amazing. Just giving another person your time and just being there for them to vent is so powerful, and it's so underrated.
Now, if you are alone and isolated right now, and we're talking about it like it's triggering you, you really can give yourself that safe space to heal on your own. You can. And I know, because I've been alone. Dana was alone. Sharon, were you alone too?
Oh, yes.
So we haven't had all this wonderful support network that we have right now. It took us years to create friendships, networks, like therapists, all of that, find the right therapist. It took us years. before we were alone, we were isolated, we were feeling crazy. There is a way you can start by just validating your own experiences, and you can, I swear you not, like I kid you not, I would take a marker and write good things to me on the wall.
Yeah.
Like that's not a joke. I would wake up and on the wall it says you are safe.
It works.
It works.
Yep. I did the same thing with
Yeah.
poster boards. I had them taped up, thumbtacked all over my house. It was these positive affirmations to myself of just, it gave me hope and it gave me a direction.
Yeah.
Powerful. It's powerful stuff. Local tourist makes the comment, the fastest way through the storm is straight through. There's a quick side note. When I was working at this domestic violence shelter, I don't know how true this is, or if it was just made for a good poster, but we had this poster up there, and it was talked about in Native American folklore, that the buffalo was so revealed. So what is the word I'm looking for? Revered. Thank you.
In stereo.
Yeah. The buffalo was so revered because when a storm would come, all of the other animals would run away, but the buffalo would be the only one to run straight through it. And the lesson learned is be the buffalo.
I was just like, be the
I like
buffalo.
that.
Because you can't outrun the storm. It's just going to last a lot longer. So there's a lot of power in that.
Yes.
Let's talk about some other tips for healing.
You know,
So
the yoga. Do you want to tell people about yoga a little bit?
Sure. Let me list these 4 points here. He talks about for healing, finding a way to become calm and focused, learning to maintain that calm in response to images, thoughts, sounds, or physical sensations that remind you of your past, finding a way to be fully alive in the present and engaged with the people around you, and not having to keep secrets from yourself, including secrets about the ways that you have managed to survive. So those were 4 big milestones that he had listed in healing. And I think as we've been talking about this, you can see it takes a while to hit each of those checkpoints. He basically just really hammers home the point of self-awareness. Self-awareness is the only way that we can consciously access the emotional brain. So it's the only way that we can really start moving through that fight or flight and stop being so reactive in our life, where we're repeating these patterns of all of these unhealed wounds. We've got to be able to slow down, stop, find safety, find security, breathe, and then start climbing up that Maslow's hierarchy to where we're able to start becoming, developing that self-awareness. And one of the quotes that he uses to illustrate this point is so spot on. It's from Moshe Feldenkrais, who says, "You can't do what you want till you know what you're doing." I love that. It just speaks about self-awareness. Like if you don't know what you're doing and why and what's driving your behavior, then you don't know what you're doing and you can't really work to change it.
Yeah, you cannot get anywhere if you don't accept where you are first, basically.
Yeah, it's sort of like, we've talked before about different addictions. Mm-hmm. To the person who's not struggling with it, it's very simple, right? Well, to the alcoholic, well, you just don't drink. Right? Problem solved. And to the drug addict, well, you just don't use meth. I don't see what's so difficult about that. And to the person who's 600 pounds, well, you just got to put down the sandwich. Well, until they can figure out what's driving their behavior, they are not going to be able to fully resolve that. That's why you see these people, especially with weight kind of stuff, they gain and lose tremendous amounts of weight. Oprah, I think, is a great example of this. She'll lose a bunch of weight and she'll really get into shape, and she's always talking about all of these diets, but that kind of stuff, it's deeper within us.
So do you remember this example of the girl who lost and gained because of the unresolved sexual trauma from her childhood?
Was that in the book?
That was in the book. That was at the end. And I was thinking like, it's so crazy because people don't realize that putting away it can be a coping mechanism, a protecting mechanism.
And layer of self-protection.
Yeah, and when you take it away, the whole person gets unglued basically and fall into the pieces. So that's why it's so important to. Here's what I'm praying for, that it will be addressing the wholeness of the human, not just one thing, a wholeness, because there is emotional reason, there is something cognitive going on, there is something in your body going on, there's a bunch of different symptoms. So like if there's any like really effective protocol ever to be created for survivors of abuse, it's something that it will be like addressing all the different symptoms in all the different ways together, not let's do this and then maybe this and then this, because you can actually make it worse for a person. You take away something that was helping them survive for 20 years. And you
can't do that without replacing it with something that provides that function in a healthy way. And to do that, you have to understand that motivation. What is it trying to protect? What is it trying to soothe? So that you can even think about, okay, well, what else could we bring in if we're going to take that away? Otherwise, you're going to put that person in crisis.
Exactly. And this is why people tend to just switch addictions.
Yep.
And this is also why abusers just tend to change up how they abuse. If they ever do, few and far between that stop with the physical abuse, then it just switches to verbal or emotional or psychological. It's and same with alcoholics. If an alcoholic gets sober but doesn't address the underlying issues, well, the next thing you know, they're smoking, or they're smoking marijuana, or they're eating, or they're shopping, or they're doing something else, because that what's originally driving that behavior hasn't been resolved. And this is what can be so frustrating, is that a lot of these addictions can be viewed as, well, alcohol, it's just a disease. Like, it's just something you have, there's no other reason for it. It's just something that you have. And the vast majority of the time, that genetic component is there, but it's triggered by something in the environment.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with food. People are like, oh, it's just this medical condition. It's my thyroid, or it's, this, that, or the other. And they really can't figure out how they got to be 600 pounds. And it's like, even if it's your thyroid, even if it's all these different health issues, that accounts for 10 or 20 pounds. That doesn't account for the 420 pounds.
Yes. It's a shame they don't teach positive self-soothing at a young age.
Yes. Boy, wouldn't that be wonderful?
It really would.
Yeah. So, but the cool thing in what he was saying in the book too, and what you guys were saying, is all of this stuff has a message for us. Yeah. That's the beauty. If we can look at this and realize, oh my gosh, all of this extra weight, this alcoholism, this drug addiction, this sex addiction, this shopping, whatever it is, however a person's trying to self-soothe, it's there to try to keep you safe. It's there to meet some sort of need. And to look at it from that place of curiosity and not judgment.
And acknowledge yourself for surviving. I think this is such a big thing for each of us to just like, you know what? Thank you for surviving. Like me, thank you. Thank yourself. Thank you for surviving. You helped me, go through that 20 years marriage or whatever, it was in your case, or 10 years here or 5 years here or whatever it was. But thank you for surviving. Thank you for, being smart enough to develop all those coping mechanisms that you develop. And then, just when you accept that, you can there was like an emotional healing that was happening inside of you, and it will happen once you acknowledge that emotion. But then you will need to re-educate yourself, and create different patterns of behavior, kind of work on changing yourself. But you will not be able to and in any way powerfully change any of your behaviors if you don't accept where you are first. I think I'm just taking it back to what you said before. Like that's it. If you are 600 pounds, first you have to get on the scale and get present that I'm 600 pounds.
And that's incredibly difficult. And if you've ever watched any of those shows, those people are like, I do not know how this happened. And there was one show, like My 600 Pound Life, and the woman was saying she ended up dying. She didn't make it. She was so large. She had said this happened. Don't let this happen to you. This happened to me 5 pounds at a time. And that's any problematic behavior we have, it tends to set in. It's slowly, it's gradually, and sometimes we don't tend to snap out of that denial until things are really, really severe.
Boundaries, like we flex, relax our boundaries with person just because we want their approval, and then we relax it more and more and more and more, and then we are in an abusive relationship. And this is after abuse already, when you go dating.
Yeah. And kind of off topic here, local tourist makes the comment. He says, well, cannabis is okay for some of us. I just wanted to address this real quick. So here's my take on substances of any kind, is I think it's very important for a person to turn inward and ask yourself, what need is this meeting? Are you smoking pot to escape, to relax? What's going on? I think certain things in moderation are fine, but if this is your way of coping, like this is how I cope with stress, and if this is the only way that you cope with stress, then that's a problem. It's the same thing with, even if a person's not like a full-blown alcoholic, but if they drink in order to handle stress, if that's their one way of coping with stress, then that's a problem.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope too.
It is a slippery slope.
Like pot, if it were illegal, I get migraines every once in a while, so I'm sure it would probably help. But then you start saying, oh, well, I don't have a migraine, but I may just this once. And that's how it starts. And then you turn around, like you said, and
everybody wants to reach for feeling a little better. That's a natural human desire.
Right.
But the awareness of that lets you make better choices about how you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of what this book is talking about, and this also goes for prescription drugs. This goes for food. This goes for anything, of if we're doing something that, to self-soothe, I guess what I'm saying is it's important that we're aware of the different ways that we self-soothe and to dig deeper, like the book is talking about, because so often we're so out of tune with our emotions that we don't even connect the two. We just think, oh, well, you know what? I just have GI issues, or I just have headaches, or I just have shoulder tension, and not realizing, well, actually it's stress. Well, actually it's my job. Well, actually it's, and dealing with that stuff that's further upstream prevents a lot of this other stuff.
Right.
And that was kind of what Dr. van der Kolk was saying, is this is the kind of unintended consequences of when we medicate, to take an antidepressant or to take anti-anxiety medication, because then that pain has become numbed out, and then we're not getting in tune with, well, why are we feeling this way? Because the vast majority of the time, there's a very reasonable, valid reason for feeling depressed or for feeling anxious.
And it's like Agata was saying about, how sometimes the physical therapy hurts worse than the injury. If you've got something that can soothe the immediate pain so that you can skip that step, that can be very appealing.
Yeah.
And it can take a while to realize that skipping that step, the cumulative pain is worse than the pain you're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
And I think that's the purpose for me, that having such a drastic catastrophe of pain in my life did for me, is it gave me no option but to, okay, you're dealing with this.
Right.
So in that way, it is a gift, because it no longer provided that excuse. And it's human nature to just move towards something that's more comfortable. It's not a shameful thing.
Yeah. And everyone the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
I think that's we're at that weird stage in society with modern medicine and technology of, we're also kind of hardwired to take the path of least resistance. And that can be very much become a problem, because who wants to sit there and focus on their pain if they can just not feel it? So it'll be interesting to see where the human race goes in the next 10 or so years, when virtual reality really becomes a thing and people can totally numb out. They can just put on glasses and then be at a beach in Hawaii. or be around some sort of sexy person.
Well, what if they could also make it like the taboo where you do this exercise with a therapist in virtual reality where you're yelling at your parents or whoever? That'd be pretty cool.
That would be pretty cool.
Neurofeedback. That would be fun.
Maybe that'll be my thing. I'll invent it.
Yeah.
You should.
You should. Yeah, that'd be great.
I want to just go back a little bit to the pain that everyone hates pain and stuff, like we go through it. It doesn't mean you have to go through it suffering. You can care for yourself, provide yourself with a support system. There are ways to self-soothe without medication through pain. If you need medication, you take medication. If you need crutches, you take crutches. Just act like a responsible adult human being with, like, just give yourself what you need.
Yeah. Do the work on top of taking the medicine.
Yeah.
Think of yourself like you are I went to the massage therapist a few times because my body holds all this crap in my back and my neck and my shoulders, and I was having lots of, I think when I was painting those paintings and going through different experiences, like having all those flashbacks, it just like ignited all of this inside of me. So I had to go get lots of massage therapy and do lots of yoga, which is another thing. But my massage therapist, who is a survivor of, actually he has PTSD given by some military experience in Iraq, and he's now practicing mindfulness and all of that. We had this great conversation, but he taught me this one wonderful thing. He said, treat your body like a child, like it's your child. And I'm like, damn, my body doesn't have this brain that, knows how to responsibly act. Like, I need to put my body to sleep. I need to give food to my body. I need to give my body a shower. And I also need to provide for my body when it, is in pain. And now on top of it, we know how trauma and, emotional pain can be trapped. So if you commit to here's the thing, healing will not happen if you won't commit to it. I mean, it will happen at some level, but like you won't really experience your healing if you don't commit to it. And, I know you didn't commit to being abused in the past, it just happened to you, but here now you have a chance to actually commit to yourself and to take a stand. And if you commit to your healing, I mean, everything is possible for you then. Seriously, everything.
Yeah. And so just as a recap, with some of the steps in healing is to get yourself to a place where you feel safe and there's a sense of calm. So a sense of security in your life. Then you can start moving forward with healing. And a big part of that is really being honest with yourself about how you're feeling and getting in tune with how do you feel when you're angry? How does that feel in your body? Is there a tightness in your chest? Is there a tightness in your stomach? Does your face become flushed? Do you start sweating? Do you start gritting your teeth? How do you experience anger? Because everybody experiences it differently. How do you experience sadness? How do you experience all of these different emotions? And really being honest with yourself. And then and another thing he mentions too is one of the challenges with trauma is a person can lose their perspective about kind of where they are in like a timeline. So trauma puts that person back to that event and it keeps them there. And so it's very difficult for a person to start working through this trauma and be in the present moment. So one of the things that's really helpful is to do some grounding exercises to become, okay, I'm here. I can feel the ground below me. I can feel the chair around me. I can feel the temperature of the room. I can see the sun coming through the blinds. I'm here. I'm fully present in this moment. Then once you're present in the moment, then you can start going backwards and examining the past. So I thought that was significant. But then, yes, working through these different emotions as they surface, making peace with them, developing that attitude of curiosity about what kind of stuff is surfacing. And like James had said, and Agatha had said too, there might be these different voices these different realizations that we can come to can be very uncomfortable. It's like, oh wow, this inner critic is actually my dad, and it's actually my ex-wife, or it's actually a combination of people, or it's all of these different fragmented parts of myself that have been trying to handle everything that I've gone through to keep me safe.
Integrate, like your
Yes.
experience really tries to integrate too.
Yeah. Yeah.
He talks about that in the book about integrating the trauma into your is it into your life or into your
Story, narrative, I don't know.
Yes.
something like that.
He had mentioned, which again, there's just so much in this book. He said, trauma, when a person goes through something traumatic, we talk about it. Oh, it's like this bomb went off in my life. Well, that bomb is an adrenaline bomb. And it's like a giant flash bulb from a camera. And when that happens, there is no linear narrative for trauma. There is no start, middle, and end. And because the body doesn't remember trauma like that, it's through series of smells and sounds and experience, touch, and all of these different things that are going on. And so as that person is starting to process all of this trauma, whether they want to or not, when you're having flashbacks, when all of these things are happening, this is why it can be so disjointing and jarring, because you might remember things you didn't remember before. It might suck you back into events that you don't remember, or that you thought you'd dealt with. And so healing isn't a linear process either. But when we've gone through getting in touch with being in the present moment, getting in touch with our feelings, really working through them, all of this stuff, over time, that trauma, we can integrate it and develop this cohesive narrative for what happened to us without continually being pulled back into it and flashing back to it. It makes the shift of, this is like the event of your life, to this is an event in your life. It's kind of the shift. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add before we get to wrapping things up?
I think we pretty much covered
I think we did too.
a lot of it, which I'm surprised, because there's a lot of information in the book.
Yeah.
Do yoga.
Yeah, that's
Get
thank you.
massages.
Yeah, it makes me want to do I want to try EMDR and yoga now.
Oh, I
wanna
did
try
EMDR. I did couple sessions.
Mhm.
That was the only thing that one of my crazy therapists, I'm not gonna tell her name because I don't want to, but
Yeah.
That's the only thing that she provided for me that actually worked. But we only work on my childhood abuse because she did not acknowledge that I was traumatized. I was having communication problems due to my borderline and dissociative personality disorder. I know, I swear, you know what was so crazy? There was this moment when she was trying to talk to my other me. And you know what? Here's the thing. There was many different me, because my experience of me was disintegrated.
Yeah.
Right.
There was moments of me when I dissociated and I had blackouts and I did things that I didn't know what I did because I didn't remember. But guess, hello, my brain wasn't working. So, I wasn't psycho. I was just crazy, abused stuff.
Yeah.
But there was this moment I remember she's trying to talk to me and I'm like, which one? I'm like, I'm here, right? And I was like, I swear this is hysterical, because it was the last session I ever had with her, because I was like, there's no way I'm that crazy. I'm like, there's no freaking way. I was like sitting in her office and looking at this little TV, like on this little like shelf. And I'm thinking, maybe she expects me to take this TV and drop it on the floor and make this big statement. I was like, I haven't, I didn't do it, but I swear this was my experience, that she really expects me to do something that crazy. And I'm like, no, I'm not that crazy. So yeah, EMDR works.
Yeah, but it's not accepted by most rural therapists yet, right? It's still kind of new age.
No, it's accepted EMDR.
It's accepted. in order for a therapist to do it, they have to be certified in it. And insurance normally does cover it. It's just finding a therapist who is specifically trained in that.
Okay.
But yeah, the body awareness, I'll tell you a real quick story about yoga. When yoga first became a thing here in the United States, I don't know, like more mainstream, I guess. It was probably 10 or so years ago. And I remember everybody was talking about yoga and it was so awesome and this, that, and the other. And I went to a few yoga classes and it did nothing for me. And it was so funny because I was like, man, this is so boring. Oh my God, like, are we done yet? What is going on? And all these different stretches. I'm not even getting a workout. It's just nothing. And then I don't know if it was a yoga teacher or where I was getting this from, but somebody had said, it's truly about like being fully present in your body. And I remember going to this yoga class and trying to do that. And it was a totally different experience because you're feeling your hands on the mat. You're feeling the stretching in the back of your legs. You're feeling your feet on the ground. You're feeling the different stretching in all of your ligaments, all of this stuff being fully present in your body, holding these different poses and paying attention to these different sensations that's surfacing within you. Tension, stress, the thoughts that might come up, the emotions that might come up. It truly is such a spiritual, self-reflective practice. It's amazing. And so I would encourage you, if you're going to try yoga, go at it with that approach of being fully present in your body. It's a different experience.
I'm surprised the instructor didn't say that though. That's kind of,
a lot of them don't. I don't know if they just assume that people know that.
If they're used to it, it might not occur to them. I don't know.
I've only ever had that one yoga instructor say anything. I've had where I go for aerial yoga, she'll talk about different things, but she's very more like science-based. So she'll talk about, okay, this pose is fantastic and it increases circulation and it does this and that with your body. But I guess I just needed to have it very spelled out about how to be present in your body, because before that, when I would go exercise, it was not about being present. I would put in headphones, I'd listen to music and I'd run. And it was sort of like, I'd listen to podcasts, I'd watch TV, I would do anything other than be present in my body because I just wanted to exercise. I just wanted to compartmentalize it. Like I just want to exercise and basically not be here while I'm doing it. So it's a very different experience to fully be present when you're moving your body.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any last words? Anybody?
Pretty much covered it all.
Okay, so real quick, just as a recap, we were discussing the book "The Body Keeps the Score" by Bessel van der Kolk. Fantastic book. You can find this book and all the other books that we're reading over at thriveafterabuse.com. We do book club the last Thursday of every month at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And next month is The Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. And then also this book club has been sponsored by Audible. You can get a free audiobook if you sign up for Audible. Go to audibletrial.com/thriveafterabuse. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here, for sharing so much of your experiences and for discussing this book. And thank you, everybody in the chat, for your time and for supporting each other and just the community here. So with that said, lots of love to you guys. Yes, you are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So we'll see you next month. Okay.
See you next month.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Goodbye.
Bye.
You can heal. Be a bison. Buffalo.
Yeah, be the buffalo. That's right.